Welcome to Office Hours Online with our Pollster.com segment with Charles Franklin, my colleague from the Department of Political Science at UW-Madison. So Charles, in 2 weeks we have a gubernatorial race in Virginia, gubernatorial race in New Jersey, and a special election for the House in upstate New York. Take us through an update of the numbers in those races and where they stand.
Great. You know, one of the things that people read for tea leaves is what happens in these odd year elections. And so New Jersey and Virginia are always looked at as whether they're bellwethers for the upcoming race. And what we see in Virginia is particularly interesting because Barack Obama won Virginia, the first time a Democrat had won the state in living memory almost, and yet the Republican there has held a steady lead throughout the campaign. It narrowed briefly when there was some controversy about his views of the role of women from a master's thesis he wrote years ago. But now that race has come back to about a steady 10-point Republican lead, and it really hasn't trended either closer or further apart. So that's one that Democrats had hoped to hold on to the governorship for, but right now there's no evidence that they have much of a shot for it.
Let me interrupt you there for a second before we go on to New Jersey and New York. Turnout's the big game in Virginia. Is turnout going to look like a typical odd year election, or is it going to look like the enormous turnout that we saw in Virginia in 2008? That must be pretty tough for pollsters.
It's very tough, but it's more likely to look like a normal election with all the people that were mobilized by the presidential campaign and anxious to support Obama in the case of Virginia, much less likely to turn out. One of the problems Democrats are facing everywhere right now is reduced enthusiasm among Democratic voters at the same time that many Republicans are using anger over the direction of the country to kind of boost their performance.
So if Deed doesn't see enormous turnout in African-American areas and an enormous turnout in Northern Virginia, no shot.
That's right. And one of the big things is whether Northern Virginia, which is around the Pentagon, around Washington, D.C., that's an area that's trended much more Democratic in recent elections and was supposed to be the key to Democrats coming back in the state. This election is not looking like Northern Virginia is going to turn out at high enough levels and with a significant Democratic advantage in order to carry the rest of the state for the Democrats. So this is a case of Virginia politics reverting kind of to normal. One of the track records in Virginia is that whoever wins the presidency often loses the governorship the next year.
Move on to New Jersey.
New Jersey was a case where the incumbent Democrat had been trailing considerably in the polls. The Republican candidate was 10 to 12 or 15 points ahead early in the year, and it looked like the Republicans to lose. And unfortunately for Republicans, it now looks like they don't have a lock on it anymore. That race has narrowed to now it's an absolute dead heat within tenths of a point between the Democrat and Republican. Part of that is because the Republican has declined while the incumbent governor, Governor Corzine, has remained absolutely steady, neither rising nor falling. The other thing that's going on in New Jersey is there's a third-party candidate who is taking 16 or 17% of the vote and seems to be taking it a little bit more from the Republican than from the Democrat. One of the interesting things that just happened recently is that the Newark Star-Ledger, one of the leading papers in the state, just endorsed the third-party candidate, Daggett, for governor. And that's a really surprising kind of move. It leaves the race really up in the air as to how the electorate will move in these last 2 or 3 weeks.
How up in the air? You obviously have a deeply unpopular Democratic incumbent, yet the Republican is having a hard time because Corzine, the Democratic incumbent, defined him, plus New Jersey's a Democratic seat.
Right.
State. Is there enough running room there for an independent? Could we?
Under normal circumstances, you wouldn't think so. Parties are quite strong in New Jersey. But one of the arguments that the Star-Ledger made in their endorsement of the third-party candidate was that both political parties have failed New Jersey, and this is a way for voters to send a signal to both parties that they're tired of irresponsible leadership on both sides. You know, Democrats are very excited right now because it looked like a seat or a governorship they were almost sure to lose now looks like it's well within play. But I would make the point that when the polls are within tenths of a point of each other, we're really not in a situation of knowing who's going to win this one.
Let's move up into New York's 23rd Congressional District, where we have a special election for the House. Barack Obama nominated John McHugh, the incumbent member up there, to be his Secretary of the Army. So there's an election. What's going on up there? Should be a Republican seat, right?
It's a Republican seat by normal standards. Here we saw a break within the Republican Party. The Republicans nominated a moderate, pro-choice woman state senator to run for the seat. But that upset conservative Republicans. So they nominated someone on the Conservative Party ballot, which is present in New York. And that conservative candidate is doing quite well, as the Republican candidate has not done very well, has not run a very effective campaign. That one probably looks too close to call right now, with the Democrat having a small lead, but it's because the Republican and the Conservative are really fracturing what under normal circumstances would be the Republican vote there. Normally we wouldn't talk about the New York 23rd District. It's only because we're so interested in trying to read these tea leaves for the future that we're paying attention to it. And the fear or the interest among Republicans especially is whether this split between sort of establishment Republicans nominating the person with the best chance to win the seat, or conservative movement Republicans wanting to stand for something strong, are going to be a divide in the Republican Party this coming year. Will we see contested Republican primaries across the country pitting strong conservative base voter candidates against more establishment, middle-of-the-road Republicans? We don't know, but that New York 23 is a good example of where these splits in the party can come out.
So when you speak about tea leaves, that really seems to be the tea leaves, because I think when we're sitting next to each other in 2010 on election night, we're probably not going to be talking about the Virginia gubernatorial race, the New Jersey gubernatorial race, and New York 23. We will be talking about it if there's a number of seats that the Republicans should have won that they didn't win because of a fractious primary or someone comes in as an independent. That might be the real lesson learned here.
I think that's right. The tea leaves that we tend to look at are the generic congressional ballot. Just ask voters, do you want to see a Democrat or a Republican win in your seat? In 2006, Democrats had about a 15-point lead on that, and they picked up nearly over 31 congressional seats. In 2008, they had a 10-point lead, and they picked up another 12 or 13 seats. Right now, the current polling is 3 to 5%. And so Democrats are very concerned that they have a small lead in that, whereas they need a big lead to really gain seats. The other thing is...
To gain or to maintain seats?
To gain or maintain. The other thing is that historically the president's party almost always loses seats in the midterm. We'd expect Democratic losses of 10 to 15 seats, just if this was a completely normal midterm election in 2010. With the small lead, and maybe even less than that in the generic ballot, Democrats are looking to lose seats, and maybe lose 20 seats, maybe lose 25 seats. But the real key will be what's happening with the economy and President Obama's approval rating as we go into that election. Will it be a growing economy and a popular president, in which case the Democrats should minimize their losses? But if the economy still hasn't turned around, we're not seeing growth in GNP in particular, President Obama's approval has slipped down into the low 50s or even the 40s, then the Democrats could be looking at a very bad year for them.
Great. Thank you, Charles. So we'll keep our eye on New York 23, New Jersey, and Virginia gubernatorial over the next 2 weeks, and then as we look towards 2010, we'll really keep our eye on Barack Obama's approval number.
Absolutely.
Thanks to everybody for joining us on Office Hours Online. If you want to see other Office Hours episodes, please go to officehours.polysci.wisc.edu, and if you want to see more analysis and current polling, please go to pollster.com, POLLSTER.com. Thanks for joining us.